Imagine you're looking at a balancing scale with everything you do for other people on one side and everything you do for yourself on the other side. If it isn't balanced, maybe it's time to spend a little more time on you. And therapy is a great place to start. BetterHelp connects you with a licensed therapist online who can help you find that balance and stick to it. Visit BetterHelp.com/positive to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp.com/positive.
All right, welcome back, everybody. Sports Daily, KFH, Jacob Albrock, Tommy Castor. Glad to have you with us, either on the air at KFH, where you've got the IHOP hotline, 869-1240, or on our video stream, which we are now in about week 2.5 on. You can always find that on our KFH YouTube page, KFH Facebook page, and on Twitter as well. So, glad to have you with us. You can comment on the show there. You can call the IHOP hotline. All right, Tommy, we're getting into the NFL draft, just sort of scratching the surface at the local appeal of it. And nobody from Kansas was selected. So then we go to K-State. And looky here. By the way, before we get into this, just one quick note of a local, signing. You had a player out of Indiana, out of Garden City. So that was about all we got on the local level. But as far as the draft goes, you had Kansas State with 4 players selected. Julius Brents ends up going after Felix Anudike-Uzomah. Our buddy Tim Fitzgerald, our K-State insider, wondered if Brents would be the first to go. It was Felix. And then Brents goes in the second round to the Colts. And then Josh Hayes goes to the Bucks in the 6th round. And then you get Deuce, as we mentioned there, in the 6th round as well. 4 players drafted from Kansas State, Tommy. That's pretty dang good.
Yeah, I don't think that you could ask for anything better than that for the Wildcats. It's a testament to, the way that program has grown over the years and what Chris Kleiman has done. We knew that, those 4 players were going to be the 4 players that more than likely were going to be drafted by from the Wildcats. We just didn't exactly know in what order and, when they were going to go. But I think that overall, we talked about Deuce falling to the 6th round. That's difficult based on his size and his position. So, while I think we're disappointed that he went all the way in the 6th round, I think that you can understand a little bit of the hesitation from teams around the league. But the other guys, man, like that, I think that just shows you how talented that defensive unit is. It was this last season for Kansas State. I mean, there's a reason why throughout the course of the college football season, you and I were having conversations last year about how dominant that defense was at times. And I think at times played like the best defense in the entire Big 12. And I think that, the fact that you've got Anudike-Uzomah and Hayes and Brents being drafted where they were, I think it proves that.
So just, for elsewhere in the Big 12, just for everybody's record keeping, Texas had 5, Oklahoma had 5, and then it's Kansas State. I think Baylor had 2, Baylor may have just had 1. Oklahoma State, I think, had 2. Iowa State had 3. And
TCU had several. TCU had, of course,
and
TCU
Johnston was going to.
Max
TCU
Duggan
always does.
Yeah.
But TCU, and I didn't even see where Duggan went. Where did Duggan go?
He went to the Chargers with Johnston. I think he went in the 6th or 7th round.
That's really interesting. He did. TCU had the most in the Big 12, by the way. It wasn't close. 2, 4, 6, 8 out of TCU. And Duggan was the 7th round pick. He was right there at the end of the draft. But pretty cool spot for him. They actually took another TCU. The Chargers did, as I'm looking at their draft. They took 2 TCU receivers. They took Darius Davis also, and then took Max Duggan. Okay. So for Kansas State, and TCU was going to out of this class, and I'd have to really dig into how many of these guys were some of those, that really talented group of transfers that came in, right? Because they had so many of them. But, for Kansas State to slot right in there after those guys, that matters, man. That means something, I think, especially when we talk about, the portal, when we talk about what could be coming next year. I don't think that they'll have that many drafted next year, but as we look long term, right, I think it matters. And it all becomes about Will Howard pretty much next year. right? And how much can they elevate him as far as like profile for the program. But to have 4 this year out of a Big 12 championship, I think that stuff matters. I think it matters to recruits. I think it matters in the transfer portal especially. But it matters, I think, too, Tommy, to validate where we probably think Kansas State sits nationally, but maybe people around the country are going to be slow to, and probably always going to be slow to, depending on what Avery Johnson does, right? Like, people will always probably kind of forget about Kansas State. Now, Avery Johnson's the kind of player that could change all that. But this stuff matters. I'm really happy for that program. These are guys that, put in the time, were stars at K-State, that now get the chance. K-State has a long history of having really good players in the NFL anyway. But I think this stuff does matter. And I think it matters to the program, and it'll be good long-term for Klieman and staff.
I think so too, and I know that they had that national profile in the Sugar Bowl against Alabama, but even then, remember the narrative was Alabama taking on little old Kansas State, right? Like that was the narrative
kind of played out
when that
way.
game happened, right? And so I think that the more that you've got players that are being drafted, at the level that they are, like Enyudike Uzama and Brents and so on and so forth, the more that you're going to be able to get that national reputation of being a solid program. And, I think to your point, you mentioned they might not have the number of players next year, drafted that they had this year. That was a really special team with the Big 12 championship and all of that. But if you're able to build some consistency with not just, the postseason play, but also the players that you're getting ready to take to the next level, that are getting ready to go to the NFL draft, Will Howard, you hit the nail on the head right there. Will he be an NFL caliber quarterback? That's going to be the big question. I don't know the answer to that.
He looked like one. He looked like one last
year.
He
He did at times, yeah, for sure. I don't know if he looked that way consistently. That's going to be the big question. So can the Kansas State staff and Colin Klein and Chris Klieman develop him to a level to where there's an NFL team that would want to draft him? It happened with Skylar Thompson. It didn't happen with Adrian Martinez. He was only there for a year, though. No, he did sign an undrafted deal.
That's because of Will Howard.
I mean, right.
So remember, Adrian Martinez was like a closet Heisman candidate there for just a minute until he got hurt. Like after he started slow, and then he went on that tear, and then Will Howard came in and sort of took over. And then Will Howard, to me, like watching, what's hard, the only thing that's hard about Will Howard, to think about him as a pro, is his career before last year. But if you just took last year, you're like, oh my God, this guy looks like a pro, right? Like if you can erase anything that happened before last year, this guy looks like a pro. He's huge. He's got control. He moves around well, like all those things. So yeah, he is a fascinating player, and probably the best thing that could ever happen to Adrian Martinez, by the way. Adrian Martinez. To Avery Johnson. Because it takes the pressure off of Avery Johnson, who does look like a special player, and maybe they can still use him just a bit. But Will Howard looks the part, and that probably, extends a K-State window because they got a lot of questions next year with the they just had 4 players drafted, and those are big losses, right, for any team to overcome outside of the the factories that exist right now. But good for Kansas State. Kansas on the way. I hope. They didn't have anybody drafted this year, but I think over the next couple they certainly will. Tommy, let's look else. Let's talk about the first round. I guess we don't have to dig into much else outside of the first round. Will Levis would be the only other storyline really outside the first round. I think that was just like jumping off the page at us. But what do you think of the quarterbacks that went? Levis ends up going round 2 at 33. Hendon Hooker fell pretty far. And the other 3 go about where we think they'll go. But it was pretty much, all that Levis talk didn't really pan out. And he falls. Tennessee, we thought might take him in the first round. They get him in the second. They feel good about that, right? It was historically, though, a quarterback-heavy draft. There were a ton of quarterbacks taken. But the top end of the class that we talked about, those 5 players, right? Hooker falls all the way to the 3rd round for Detroit, which makes a ton of sense and feels like a pretty good spot for them. But everybody outside of Bryce Young here feels like a team took a little bit of a risk. Houston, were they going to take a quarterback? Well, they did, and they still got Will Anderson, but they, hitched their wagon to C.J. Stroud, who will certainly I think, have a chip on his shoulder after all the chatter, even though he went number 2 overall. And then the most intriguing quarterback of the group is Anthony Richardson. Now at Indianapolis, a place where he doesn't have to get rushed into play, despite what Jim Irsay says. I cannot imagine that they will thrust him in there right away. But that's a pretty good spot. I think, honestly, all of these quarterbacks, again, in those top 5 that we've been talking about, all of them landed in a good spot, I think. Like, I think those are good spots for all of them to be able to succeed.
I think so too. I think that all 5 of those quarterbacks are in positions that, they can have a lot of success. Now, I don't think that this is necessarily going to be like 2004 when you had Roethlisberger and Manning and Rivers. Was it Rivers? No. That was the other one.
Yeah.
All 3 of them, had great careers and played for a long time. Hall of Famers. Like, I'm not sure that I want to go that far and say that all 5 of them are going to have, long-term flourishing NFL careers, because that rarely, if ever, happens. But I think there's a good chance that maybe 3 of the 5 have really solid and long-term NFL careers. So that wouldn't surprise me one bit. I know that there was all of this speculation and drama about what was going to happen with the number 1 pick and where the Panthers really sold on Bryce Young, or were they going to go a different direction last minute. There were even some folks that were speculating Will Levis could jump all the way up to number 1. At the end of the day, though, it was all misdirection. It was all smoke and mirrors. The Panthers got the guy that I think they were in on the entire time. I don't think that there was any sort of, there might have been some conversations about Stroud and Levis and Richardson, but ultimately, it was Bryce Young all along. Yeah. If you're making that trade for the number 1 pick, you know who your guy is, and they were pretty solid on that, I would think, from day one.
I do too. I think, but he's in a good spot, right? So Bryce Young and CJ Stroud were the 2 guys that you felt like have the best chance to just go in and start right now, I think. And they landed in the 2 spots that those teams are sort of banking on them to do that. Neither team, to me, even though they picked at the top of the draft, obviously Carolina traded into that spot. Neither of those teams, I think, next year are going to be like the worst teams in football. Houston, that might be a bit of a stretch to say, but I don't think they will be. So you've got those, and those are pretty good spots, right? Pretty good situations. You feel decent about it. So, okay, you've got that. And then you get the other guys of the 5 that we talked about. Richardson, to me, again, I know Jim Irsay said he wants him to play right. I don't think that Richardson's under any pressure to start in the first, 6 games of the year, right? Like, there's just no need to do that with him. And his upside, his ceiling is the highest, right? He's this monster with a cannon that can run faster than most receivers on the field, but they've got Gardner Minshew there, and there's just no pressure to start Richardson right away. And that's a good thing. I mean that in a positive way. Will Levis, sort of the same thing, right? Like, there's no pressure to just cram Will Levis out there. I know a lot of people have him the highest. Time will tell, and I get why. Again, huge, fast, big arm, all that stuff. That's good. And then Hendon Hooker, who, listen, there are a lot of people that said they think that Hendon Hooker was the best quarterback in this class, and in a good system could be really successful. There is absolutely no pressure on Hendon Hooker, right? Jared Goff's fine. Jared Goff is an average to good NFL quarterback. There's no pressure to play Hendon Hooker this entire season. And so I like all those spots, because what I want to see happen with any college quarterback is them to succeed. I want the NFL to have as many good quarterbacks as it can possibly have. So to have all these guys get into spots where I think they can be successful, I'm in. I'm happy about that. Eddie comments on our video stream on Facebook that he went to the Thursday portion of the draft, and it was awesome. I'm glad to hear that, Eddie, because it looked awesome. The backdrop was perfect. The fountain, all the facilities, the sea of red, like it was phenomenal. And I imagine just a major boon for Kansas City and the region. So congrats if you were able to make it up. Hope you had a great time, whether it was Thursday or Friday or Saturday into the weekend. Just a fantastic NFL draft. Really good stuff there. We'll get back into the draft in the second hour. will continue here on Sports Daily. Lots of other stuff happening. We've got Wichita State baseball and softball to update you on. We've got NBA playoffs with some drama and cool things happening. All kinds of good stuff. We'll continue with Sports Daily, some giveaways when we come back. Keep that IHOP hotline handy. Your chance to win a prize coming up right after this.